Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey, welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I am so pleased to have someone I consider a friend now who's been on the podcast before. We've been connected for a few years, who just had a new book launch. So I'm so excited to have Renee Bauer here with me this morning. Renee, thank you so much for sharing some of your day with me. Please reintroduce yourself to our listeners and about your exciting new baby you just birthed. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you for having me. I absolutely adore you. I feel like we're kindred souls. So I always love when we chat. So I'm so excited to do this.
I love it too.
Yeah. So I've been a divorce lawyer for 20 years, and I'm kind of in this interesting transitional period where I may be exiting that part of my life and moving on to something different. But part of the work that I did as a divorce lawyer working with women was often beyond just the law. Like, women came to me and they had other things that came up and that then manifested as a relationship that has sort of spiraled, but it was a lot of worthiness issues. There was a lot of times women being afraid to have uncomfortable conversations about women being people pleasers. They didn't want to disrupt the status quo, or they were too worried about what everyone else thought. So I thought to myself, I first started to put together a divorce book, and then I realized I don't want to write a divorce book. I'm like, that's too late in the game. I'm like, I want to go back to when all of this started. And if I really thought about it, I'm like, well, let me go back and look at myself and what the journey that I've been on, having been twice divorced, and realize that what I had was a good girl complex. And it went going back to my childhood of wanting to be a people pleaser, not wanting to have hard conversations that might make someone else uncomfortable because I felt bad about it. And so it was like, well, what do we have to do to shed that good girl role that so many of us have been brought up into, and, smile more, and don't even with our parents, like, you don't want to disrupt them and you want to keep the peace. And once you drop that, and I realized at some point I did drop that, and then what happened? And massive expansion happened. Having the relationship that I always wanted happened because I was not afraid of having hard conversations or really being vulnerable.
You were probably more authentic for the first time when you were not so afraid of putting others first.
Yeah. And being unapologetic about it, and just being like, hey, like, here's what my needs are. Here's what my wants are. I want to honor where you are too. Let's have a conversation, and let's put ourselves, from the bottom of that list to the top. So that was the idea of what the book was all about. It was about ditching your inner good girl and helping women get to that point where they can make really hard decisions or take risks, because a lot of women don't like to take risks, so they could have a life that they absolutely loved. So it's not a divorce book. There are divorce stories because it's certainly part of my journey, but I'm a writer. That's what I've always done. So it's a lot of storytelling. And it's just a fun ride, emotional ride. I really unpacked a lot of my own stuff as I was writing it that I thought was all healed. I'm like, where'd that come from? I thought I had that packed away somewhere. So it was just it's really raw and vulnerable. And I'm really excited to have finally put it into other people's hands, because it feels like it's been forever.
Oh, I am so thrilled for you. And I think the things that you're describing, I have felt in myself. I see with so many of my clients, and to be able to give language to it, or to let a woman know you're not alone in this experience, right? So maybe it was the way we were socialized, our culture. And I love that phrase of, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So to be able to recognize, oh, wait, I can actually do something about this.
Yeah. I heard the phrase, and I don't like to use it a lot because I think it might minimize people who have been victimized, but it's like, at some point, you're no longer a victim, you're a volunteer. And I'm careful about it because there are people who have really gone through some traumatic stuff, but at some point, like, we all can have we can reach that, we're like, well, we can feel really bad for ourselves and we can kind of sit in that and stay there in that pattern of negativity, or we're going to choose something different for ourselves. And we're going to be proactive about having the life that we want. And that's hard because it's really hard to get out of that negative mindset. It's hard especially if you're going through a divorce, to have, like, when your ex is like, no, you know what, this is my responsibility to create and set up the life that I absolutely love. And it's hard to make that switch, but it's a game changer when you do.
It is. So what would you say for women, especially a woman who might be listening, to say, that sounds great, but I have no idea where to begin? Or like, I don't even think that's possible. Maybe that's great for you, Renee, but that's not going to work for me. Like, so what would you say to the woman who desires what you're describing as the outcome, but has either no experience to know it's possible, or self-confidence challenges, or maybe people around her who won't support her whatsoever? Yeah. That's another challenge. Like, I want to do the work, but no one around me is going to support it.
Well, and to work backwards and go there first, is we are never going to keep everyone else happy if we're worried about what other people think, or we're living to please other people. So, it's recognizing that. But part of the book is I teach a framework throughout the whole thing to bring people through anytime they're at a decision-making point, anytime they're at a crossroads, and how to get past that. Because I realized that women would come to me over and over again and ask the same question, how do you know? And I found myself bringing them through these certain steps and walking them through this process. And then I'm like, well, I need to really put a name to what I'm talking about. So let me come up with something. And so the framework is stop, drop, and roll. And we're taking like an old phrase that was used back in the 70s to put out fire, because our clothing was apparently very flammable back then. And I'm like, let's just rinse this off and use it to light up your life. And so anytime you get to that point where you're at a crossroads and you're trying to decide, which way do I go? What do I do? And it could be a marriage, it could be a job, it could be starting the business, like whatever it is. The first thing you have to do is to stop and assess and take inventory of how you're making your decision. And when we make our decision from our gut instinct, our inner knowing, that's always going to be the right decision. But what typically happens is our head gets in the way. And so a lot of times that damn head tries to keep us safe. And, I'll say to a woman coming in the context of divorce, and she'll like, I just don't know what to do. And I'll say, well, if it was your daughter sitting across from you and she had the marriage that you have, would you want her to stay? And usually the response is, well, no. Well, why is it not good enough for her, but it's good enough for you? So like, remove yourself. So when you make that decision from your head, from your heart, and eliminate your head from the process, you have the answer you need. But that's not enough, because a lot of people will say, well, I know what I want to do, but I can't move past that. And so the next phrase is to drop your excuses, because we all have so many excuses that hold us back. Think about, I'll do it when the kids are older, when I have more money, when I lose 10 pounds. Like, we're constantly coming up with reasons why we don't go for whatever it is we want now. And so take an inventory of it, acknowledge it, so that you can remove it from your decision-making process. And the last step is, your heart's right and your head's right, but now we have to take action. And that's strategy, because nothing is going to happen on its own. And it's rolling into action by creating momentum, doing the smallest thing to bring you forward. Write it down, say, I will do this when, put it on a sticky note, put it on your phone, be very clear and specific. I will do whatever that action is, and put a date on it. And that's the first thing. And no matter what, you'll win, because no matter the outcome, you will end up moving from a place of stagnation. And even if it doesn't look like the way you wanted it to, even if it comes out a little bit different, you're still winning, because sometimes, I always like to say, sometimes the universe knows better than we do about what's best for us.
I love that so much. And the stop part, I think back to myself during that stage before getting divorced, and what I needed to do is to get really still. Like, that was the first time I started meditating, and it was like all the things that were in my head, the logic, the reason, the rationality, that on paper it looks great, but all the boxes are checked, like all of the part that my emotion wasn't aligning with. And when I got really still, I learned to tap into that inner wisdom, because I kept denying the inner wisdom for years. And it wasn't bad enough to have to really pay attention, because it wasn't really bad, but wasn't good enough to necessarily stay forever. So even if it's not a horrible situation, you know, and your inner wisdom is screaming something different than what that logic is, that stop part is, I think, one of the hardest to engage in, because then it's like, oh shit, then I've got to pay attention to what's in there.
I know, but don't we do that for everything? Like from the most mundane, we do that. We're constantly having this, but what do they say? Like it's 18 inches from the head to the heart, but it's like a galaxy apart as to the decision-making process. We do it for everything. I mean, I did it for the subtitle of my book. I could not decide on what it was. I literally asked and crowdsourced probably every friend and family member I knew. And guess what? I got 50 different responses, which was completely useless. And then I sat with it. I'm like, let me just sit quietly. Let me go for a walk and let me figure this out on my own. And then just like that, I'm like, oh, that's all it took. I could have saved myself a whole lot of angst.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easier to not do that step because it feels the most vulnerable too. But I'm curious what in your experience, because I want to go through the other steps too, but I'm just sticking on this stop piece, because I find it's really, really hard for women to really trust that inner wisdom. So, you know, thinking back to some of the things that you said in the beginning, when you were describing the ideal, I think, reader for your book, women who've been people pleasers, right? Who are afraid to have hard conversations. They've been in a habit of dismissing their inner wisdom for forever.
Yeah. It is a muscle that has to be flexed over and over again in order to get more comfortable. And it's really hard. It's not a flip a switch. Like I even at this point, and now I'm so aware of it, I will sometimes catch myself thinking something or about to say something that actually isn't really aligned. And I'm like, oh, no, I need to stop. So it's a constantly checking in and reminding yourself, are you doing this or having this conversation or saying yes because you're trying to keep someone else happy? Or do you really want to do this or not do it? And so you're constantly practicing that, because we have years and years of conditioning that we now have to decondition.
Yeah. I've been giving this example lately with clients regarding our inner wisdom and how often it's actually accurate, but we don't honor it as a big component. And the example I give, if you're in, especially a new city, and you're walking down the street in a new city at night and your gut says, ooh, this isn't really a safe neighborhood, even if nothing around you visually gives you an indication that you're not safe. But if your gut goes, ooh, maybe I should find a different street, you likely are going to follow that and go walk down a different street. If you're walking down a street and it feels safe, you're likely going to continue to walk down that street. But it's like, how often in our lives are we walking down the street going, this doesn't feel safe, but we're like, oh, but I have to stay here because I started on this street, so I have to finish this street, or I was told to go on this street, but we're denying in our everyday lives. But if we were actually out in the world, we would probably find a different street.
Right. Or you tell yourself, oh, you're just being ridiculous. You know, you're being unreasonable.
You're minimizing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was my second marriage. Like on that morning we eloped, and that morning I woke up, I was getting ready, and I had this immediate like pit in my stomach. And it was like, wait a second, something is off. And I told myself, well, that's silly. You just have cold feet. No, it wasn't. And I learned that really fast. And so it's now I pay attention, because now when I have that thought, I'm like, it's important and it's telling me something. So let me even write it down and like come back to it and just kind of process it and think about it. So women are so intuitive, you know, and I think we've been like trained to not pay attention to that because we live in such a masculine world and, you know, and it's like when you sit with that intuition, it's amazing the things that come up and like the thoughts that process through. And it's just like, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah, no, it's such a powerful step, and not to be minimized, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, just to get that stillness, even if it's walking, but just to consciously check in and have that inner barometer be that little periscope of what can I see here? What am I here to learn?
Yeah.
The next one, the drop excuses. Well, that must be easier said than done, huh?
Yeah. I mean, listen, we all have them. Like I live in a place of excuses. We all do. Like it's in any given day. I'm like looking at my calendar today and I'm like, I really don't want to go to the gym. I'm like, well, I'm a little like feeling a little crampy, so I'm not going to go. And like, and there's a difference between honoring like where your body feels and all of that. But
Right.
when I told myself that same thing for the past 4 days, that's an excuse. I'm
Right.
beyond honoring my body. I'm just coming up with reasons not to go. So, I mean, those things, but those things come up all of the time. And, that's a little example, but the big ones can really dictate what choices we make in our life. And fear is a big one, and not having enough money or being alone. Like those are the ones that can really keep you stuck.
How do you help people get past that? Because that fear can be very real, not just imagined, right? Whether it's financial or someone who has never been on their own before, or especially if you're going to, let's just stick with the topic of divorce, not have, a co-parent available. So you feel like I'm actually going to do this alone. Like, so what do you say when those excuses have validity to them?
Yeah. So I asked the question, what are you afraid of? Because then when they start to answer, you can unpack that, and it's usually details. So if it's a money one, for example, what are you afraid of? Well, I've never been the one who's paid the bills. Okay, well, you can put a system into place where you feel comfortable, and you can put something practical into place to address the much larger fear. Or if they say I'm afraid of being alone, well, why? Like, what is it about being alone that scares you? And then it's like, okay, so how about you join some things, join some groups, take some classes, so you're not in that traditional romantic relationship, but you're not alone. You're surrounding yourself with people so you don't feel alone. So do some things to nourish your soul. So usually when people have that big high level fear, we can break it down into much smaller action steps to alleviate some of that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's fear of fear itself.
Yeah.
We can have a lot of anticipatory anxiety. I remember I once was working with a woman who had late onset anxiety. She was in her 60s, and it kind of came out of nowhere, and it was causing a lot of somatic problems and a lot of stomach aches and nausea, which prevented her from being social. And she was scheduled to go on a cruise with another couple, or a couple of couples, and she was nervous about what if she got sick, what if she threw up. And I remember walking her through every step of her saying, okay, I'm gonna, what happens if because we go to that what if, right? That's the fear space. And she said, well, what if I'm boarding the ship and I need to throw up? And I just said, okay, if that happened, what would be the worst case scenario? Well, worst case scenario is I can't find a garbage or a bathroom to throw up, and I throw up on the floor. Okay, if that were to happen, that would be unfortunate. And what would be the worst case scenario? Well, I might be embarrassed, or I might get dirty. Okay, if that were to happen, could you survive that? Well, yeah, I could survive that. My husband would be there. I could change my clothes. I could. So we kind of went through every step. And like, it turns out the worst case scenario, like I could actually get through that. I wouldn't like it, but I could get through that. So it seems like that's part of what you're talking about when looking at things that are holding us back, to say, yeah, that would be a hard thing. And what are your resources? What is your support? What is your plan?
And so much of it is people don't like to be uncomfortable. And it's like, so why? So what's the worst that happens if you're uncomfortable? And let's get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, let's sit in how that feels. And you know what? You're not going to die in that space of being uncomfortable, even if it's hard. And it's like, I think
it sure feels like it sometimes though.
It does. And I think we're like, we spend so much time not wanting to feel the pain, or not wanting to, have something be really hard. And, recognizing, like you and I think have been through and on the other side, to recognize like that moment, that hard, that uncomfortable is just a season. It is just a moment, and you come out, you grow so much from that. Like, there's such growth that happens through that uncomfortableness, and you come out and you're like, yeah, like I survived that. If I survive that, I can survive something that's even harder. And I think that's a beautiful experience to have, because you're no longer going to play it safe in your life. You're going to take the risk and be like, I'm going to go for it, because what's the worst that happens? I get rejected. So what?
Yeah. We were talking for a few minutes before we hit record that I just was coming out of like the hardest year of my life. And I had been through enough hard things to be able to really try and practice some deep wisdom in the midst of
Yeah.
it. And the wisdom that I got to was, even at what felt like just roll up in the ball crying, horrible moments, my response to it was, how would I respond differently if I knew this was in service to my highest self?
Yeah. Oh,
Or
I
how
love
would I
that.
respond differently if I knew this was in divine timing? And I chose to take that spiritual mindset
Mm-hmm.
to not just help me through it, but to recognize like there's lessons here. I know that I'm supposed to be going through this. And because I have that spiritual belief that I'm going to
Yeah.
grow and thrive and get to that other side, it made it a little bit easier, ever so slightly. So someone who's
Yeah.
listening to say like, okay, but I don't want to be uncomfortable. Like I was the most fucking uncomfortable I've ever been, but you don't get growth from being comfortable.
It's funny because I'm sort of sitting in that space right now where there's some big changes happening and big transitions. And there was a part of me that was holding on, like I had a death grip on it. And I'm like, no, it's not time, it's not safe, it's not practical. And then I was sort of forced. It was like I was shoved into it. And I was like, what? And then I realized, I'm like, no, 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 like this is the perfect time. Because for that same thing, it was like I leaned into my spirituality for this and was like, this has to happen, and it has to be really hard so that I can move on to do the next thing and come out the other side. It's like, it's
Yeah.
when you shift that and you recognize that hardness is happening for me, like it really changes that whole victim mentality, and you almost can appreciate it and almost have gratitude. Like I've practiced last week, I had some rough moments, and I'm like, I'm going to be so grateful for this moment and for that email.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do, and it takes work, and you have to like constantly go back there and check in and be like, no, I am grateful. As
Yeah.
you're saying it through gritted teeth, but eventually you say it enough and then you start to feel that.
Yeah, definitely. And the last part of that framework, the role, the take action. I love that. It also like just the role piece of it feels like it can be smooth. There doesn't have to be
Yeah.
bumps. It can be even just an inch forward as long as you start to have that trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think because people think they have to take massive action, they have to take leaps and bounds. And that's really scary for some people. And depending on whatever that action is, the bigger it is, the harder it is. So just start small. Start with the smallest thing just to create some of that momentum. And then it becomes easier to take the next step and the next step and the next step. And then that big leap doesn't feel so big anymore because you've closed the gap.
I love that so much. So who is the ideal reader for your book? And we haven't even said the title yet. She Who
Yeah.
Wins.
It's She Who Wins. So it is really for I kind of wrote it for like the woman that I used to be. So I'm 46, and I thought back to, all right, when I was in my 30s or even my early 40s, or even like who was I as I was trying to figure out who I am in this world and what my place is and how to express my power, my voice, and all of that. So it's for any woman who finds themselves wondering like what's next, or questioning like, is this as good as it gets? And that could be meaning that they feel stagnant in a job, in a relationship, or any point in their life where some of the joy has sort of dissipated. So it's for that woman, regardless of your age. It's just a woman who's ready to leap into something that seems crazy and seems big and wild, and just needs a cheerleader in the back end, kind of hyping them up
I
and ready
love
to get
that.
excited for it.
And I think that's such a ubiquitous question, is this as good as it gets?
Yeah.
And to not be afraid to listen to the answer. I think
Yeah.
many women ask the question, but are afraid of that stillness to check in of, oh shit, what if I say no, it's not? Then what? Then you read
Yeah.
Renee's book.
Right? I mean, if we say, yeah, this is as good as it gets, I feel like we've thrown the towel in. And I know where I am. I have a whole lot more of life I want to live. I want to do, accomplish, to love, to do all of that. Like I'm not I'm not mailing it in at this age, you know, and I don't think
No.
any of us have to. Like, we can pivot and transition and change at any point in our life. Just because we're with one person or doing one job or have a certificate on our wall that says something does not mean that we have to do that for the rest of our lives.
No, absolutely not. It makes me think about, I don't know if you've ever seen her on Instagram, Dr. Edith Eger, who
No.
is a 95-year-old Auschwitz Holocaust survivor. And she wrote her first book, came out when she was 92.
I love that.
And she had a second book come out like a year later, and she's still an active therapist. I mean, she's like brilliant. And, I think about, and her first book is called The Choice, because it's all about her choice to no longer be a victim of the Holocaust and how she was a prisoner in her own mind because of the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, if she can move on, anyone can,
I mean, you
and
just gave me chills.
yeah, her story is absolutely incredible. Her book is incredible. I highly recommend it. And it also, I was thinking about her when you were talking about your framework, because she has this really great 4 journal prompt questions that says, what do you want? Who wants it? No, I'm forgetting the 4th one. What do you want? Who wants it? What are you going to do about it? And when?
I love
But
it.
I love the who wants it, because I think, again, women were conditioned to not be clear. Is this what I want? Or is this what is best for my partner? Is this better for the greater good? Is this better for my kid? And so many women get lost in their roles.
Yeah.
That they don't know how to differentiate what they want from what their family needs.
It's so true. Yeah, that's a big one. And like, I look at so I have a son who's 17 now, and I have been so intentional about sharing my journey with him in terms of like my entrepreneurship and businesses and just spirituality, and talking about these things and having these open conversations. And it's when we look at like what we teach our kids, and so often we think we're acting what's in their best interest, or we're shielding them for something, or protecting them. And like, if I can leave him with thinking about his mother as someone who went for her dreams, who had, boundaries, took care of herself, loved fiercely, I'm like, that's the lesson that I want to teach. Not that I gave myself up so that he could have fresh baked cookies for every bake sale that his school had. Like, that's not what he remembers. And when we have, now that he's 17, like, we can have much deeper conversations, but his memories have absolutely nothing to do to the traditional things that we think as a parent we have to do in this role that we have to fill. It's other stuff. And, that's like, and I think if we can take a step back, and I have friends who they sacrifice themselves because they think they have to be a martyr for their family. And their soul is so dim because of that. They're so depleted and they're so resentful. And I'm like, your kids are watching that. Like, imagine the opportunity to teach them something different so they go after that, and that light and that happiness. Like, that's what we should be focusing on.
It makes me think, Renee, and you're so right. It makes me think when my daughters were younger, especially my little one, she had a really, really hard time when I would even just go out for dinner with a girlfriend, or then I started going on retreat. And I mean, she would hide my keys, and she would kind of, with her hands in prayer pose, she would bow down and she would say, Mama stay instead of namaste. Like, this broke my heart.
Oh
Mama
my
stay.
God.
She didn't want me to go. But when she was about 8 or 9, a friend of a family friend, gave her one of those like mother-daughter journals that we would fill out together. And one of the questions was, describe your mom in a couple of words. And one of the first words she used was adventurous. And I was like, wow, like, she might have really struggled with me being gone, but what she saw was me being adventurous. So even though it was hard, didn't mean it didn't impact her in a positive way. She still could have hated it when I was not home.
Yeah.
And now I'm not taking credit for it. It just is, perhaps coincidence, but perhaps a little bit of role modeling. She's one of the most adventurous people I know. Like, she has led me places, literally, like physically, in the world that I never would have otherwise gone to. So we don't know the impact that we're making by making these choices that feel, quote, and here's a question for you I'll put it in the remote question. for many women who desire some of these outcomes that your steps are talking about, I think we have this fearful narrative of, does that make me selfish? So how do you respond when people feel like, oh my God, but if I take care of me like that, what if I'm being selfish?
It's so interesting because I've lived in both worlds. When my son was younger, I lived in that world of like thinking that I was being selfish if I was doing all of these things, and now in a very different space. And it's, as taking the time. So I look at it as, I don't even look at it as like self-care and like physical stuff and spa days and stuff, but I'm looking at like what nourishes my soul, what fills me up from the inside out, impacts how I show up in the world. I am a far better parent, wife, boss, all of the roles, because I take care of myself from the inside out, and then sometimes from the outside. And so it's like, so it's not selfish because everyone around you benefits from the fact that you're happy, or that you feel at peace, or you're calm, or your anxiety levels down because you just came home from yoga class, and now when you're putting your kids to bed, it's joyful and not rushed and chaotic. Like, wouldn't you rather your kids feel the calm from you rather than chaos? And if that means you took that 1 hour to go do that thing, then you go do that thing. I think it's actually selfish when we don't take care of ourselves, because I know I'm not my best person. And I am like, I can go down that path where it's like, watch out if I'm neglecting myself. And, sometimes it happens, you're hustling so hard and there's so much to do. And I'm like, whoa, like I am not showing up the way that I want to. And so it's not selfish. I think that's again, that's some old story, someone somewhere put in one parent, grandparent's head, that we have to like either give our entire world over to somebody else, or we're not good enough.
Right. Such old narrative, such old conditioning. So it makes me think, and it would be remiss to not just bring this up, because it's, as we're recording this, it's still summertime, even though when this episode comes out, it'll be a few months from now. But Barbie is huge this summer.
Yeah.
Right? Have you seen it?
I haven't. I really want to, though. I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. It's really good because it's talking about how to undo the conditioning that women have had of trying to meet this impossible standard of what it means to be a woman. And, it's such a conditioning of our socialization. So if you're having a hard time embodying what we're talking about today as you listen, let's have compassion for yourself. This is how we were raised as a society and culture. So I'm really hopeful that this is beginning to shift our lens on what being a woman means, and the expectations of being so unrealistic and mostly unattainable at all levels. That we need more tools, more frameworks, more books, more support that are tangible, not just conceptual. Because I think that's the hard part too, is how do we make the conceptual an action item that I feel like, oh, I can actually do that. I can do that today. I can attend to that.
And I think it's these conversations and these podcasts too, is like, we just keep rinse and repeat and keep, we keep saying it. We hear, like, I'm constantly reading, constantly consuming different things, and you're taking it in from all sides. And sometimes it sticks really well, and sometimes it rolls off of you, and you just keep putting yourself in a space where you're being reminded that you can change. You can change your story, you can change your path, you can change your life situation, like whatever it is.
I love it so much. And are you also still doing your conferences?
So I just had, so we had our second one back in April. That was probably one of the most challenging things I've ever had to do, because I ran it, like I didn't just pass it off, like I ran it in all of the details. So I haven't planned one for next year yet. If I do, it'll probably be fall of 2024, or I may take a little bit of a breather or a break, because it really was an all-consuming project.
I bet. Well, from looking at it from afar, it looked like it was amazing and empowering for many women, which is really what you're here to do. So, Renee, how can people find you and your book? And please promote it, share it so we can get it out to more people so they can journey forward in their life. So where can they find you?
So it's you can find me on Instagram at Ms. Renee Bauer, MS Renee Bauer. I'm always in there. That's the best place to reach out and has all the links to all of the things. And then the book can be anywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you buy your books, bookshop.org. I'll pop that one in there because that supports indie bookstores.
Perfect.
Any of those places.
I love it. Well, congratulations on the accomplishment of getting it out into the world. And I'm so pleased to have our connection continue. And just thanks for being a friend and part of, the Journey Forward community, helping women, because that's what we're here to do. So thank you so much. I'm so appreciative.
Thank you for having me back.
Of course. And if this episode spoke to you and you are ready to be a woman who is winning in areas of her life, we would love a rating, a review, or a share. So like I said, we can have more women journey forward in feeling confident and aligned mind, body, and spirit in their life. So thanks you guys so much for tuning in. And I hope that you take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.